I'm here with Sir Richard Jolly, who is joining us for this year's Hans Singer Memorial Lecture. Welcome at the German Development Institute.
Thank you very much.
Sir Richard, you have been the long-time director of the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex, and you were a close associate of Sir Hans Singer. Would you be so kind to tell us some personal notes on Hans Singer?
I will indeed, and he was a good friend as well as a wonderful pioneer in development, particularly economic development studies. And beginning when he was a doctoral student in Cambridge at the time of Keynes. And once he'd got his doctorate in Cambridge, he then was recruited by the Archbishop of Canterbury to do a study of unemployment in Britain.
When was that?
1936, and they published their study in 1938. This was a time as the present when unemployment was a big issue. The interesting point I always felt was that they lived with unemployed families in 5 big towns of Britain. So they had not merely the study, but they had the human experience and so on and so forth, and produced a book called Men Without Work. I often said, as a graduate student, I wonder who, having worked with a Nobel Prize winner in economics today, would then go and live with unemployed families somewhere. That was Hans. But I personally first met him in Addis Ababa, when I myself was a graduate student in 1963. And we shared a house on the Jimma Road in Addis Ababa. And I was employed briefly doing some background work on education in the Economic Commission for Africa. And Hans was there for about a year doing work on African economies for ECA. Again, what was interesting aside of Hans, he would insist on sharing the car because we had a house we were renting from someone, and we'd take it in turns. But Hans was a terrible driver. And when women and children and goats and people would rush across the road, Hans would take his hands off the steering wheel and say, and I'd say, Hans, let me drive. I'd be, no, you can drive tomorrow, Richard. Jumping to the end of his life, actually, Hans carried on at IDS after he left the UN, and he was there 37 years in the Institute and gave his final lecture a week before he was 95. And I'd always say to the students, because I used to introduce Hans, if you meet the Pope and you shake hands with the Pope, you're shaking hands with the person, all the way back to St. Peter. In the case of Hans, you're shaking hands with someone all the way back to Keynes, John Maynard Keynes. Perhaps one of the biggest contributions, well, 2 of the biggest contributions of Hans was one, his work on the unequal terms of trade between developed and developing countries, which was truly pioneering and published in the American Economic Review back in 1949, I think it was. And then I myself was with him in Kenya when we were again looking at employment issues in 1972 for the ILO employment mission. And Hans was very conscious of the issues that he'd learnt about from studying unemployment in Britain. But we were a big mission, and we were looking at all the issues. And then one morning, when we were reaching the stage of drafting the report, he came down with his whimsical smile. He always had a whimsical smile. I think I've got the idea for an integration of the strategy we're proposing, which was redistribution from growth. That there needed, if we were going to, Kenya was going to expand employment and tackle poverty, there needed to be measures of redistribution, but not redistribution by taking money from the rich and giving to the poor, changing the very structure of development so that over time there would be progressive taxation, progressive ways of taking some of the gains of income from the rich, channeling them into investment in the poor, investment in education, investment in more employment, investment in informal sector industry, and so forth. And that idea of Hans's became redistribution with growth, the generalization, which was very much a major theme of the 1970s. Tragically has been lost in the 1980s and 1990s, even today, but is, I hope, coming back, because redistribution with growth needs to be a key issue in the modern world, both for recovery and for a long-run sustainable development. That's dear Hans.
Sir Richard, thank you so much for sharing some of the memories you have of Hans Singer.
Thank you.